for them
Marcus
with
Chin
3
had been
years,
alone for
4
3
months,
years,
and
4 months,
16
and
days.
16 days.
Not that he was counting.
The digital calendar on his workstation reminded him every morning when he powered up the mining equipment.
The
Right
Kepler
there next to
4-2b
Sarah's
mining
photo,
colony
the one
wasn't
where
much
she
to
was
look
laughing
at.
at
12
something he
prefabricated
said,
buildings
her dark
scattered
hair
across a
catching
plateau.
the artificial sunlight of the biodome. The Kepler 442b mining colony wasn't much to look at. 12 prefabricated buildings scattered across a plateau of red rock, connected by covered walkways that rattled in the alien wind. Home to 43 humans, 17 Zolari traders, and a handful of other species who found the remote location useful for reasons they didn't share. It was the kind of place people came to disappear, to start over, or in Marcus's case, to forget. He'd been checking the eastern perimeter sensors when the proximity alarm chimed. Nothing unusual, the local wildlife occasionally triggered the motion detectors. Six-legged creatures about the size of deer that the colonists called hoppers for their peculiar gait. Harmless, but curious enough to investigate the human settlement. Marcus pulled up the feed on his tablet, expecting to see the familiar sight of hoppers nosing around the sensor array. Instead, he saw something that made his coffee cup slip from his fingers. Two small figures huddled against the base of sensor post 7. Even through the grainy security footage, he could tell they weren't hoppers. They were children. Alien children, but children nonetheless. Jesus, he breathed, grabbing his emergency kit and heading for the door. The wind outside hit him like a physical blow. Kepler 442b's atmosphere was thinner than Earth's, and the temperature rarely climbed above freezing. He'd adapted to it over the years, but these kids, whatever species they were, looked like they'd been out there for hours. The all-terrain vehicle bounced over the rough terrain, kicking up clouds of rust-colored dust. Marcus pushed the engine harder than he should have, but something in his chest was pulling tight. Maybe it was the way the smaller figure was curled around the larger one, protective even in unconsciousness. Maybe it was the fact that they were alive at all in this wasteland. As he got closer, details became clear. Purple-tinged skin, delicate features, clothing that had once been fine but was now torn and stained. They couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old in human terms, though alien aging was always tricky to judge. The larger child, a girl, he thought, was shielding the smaller one with her body. Both were unconscious, their breathing shallow but steady. Marcus had seen plenty of alien species during his 15 years in the colonies. These children belonged to the Vorthak, a proud warrior race known for their rigid social hierarchies and complex family structures. What were Vorthak children doing alone on a human mining colony? He lifted the smaller child first, definitely the younger sister based on the protective positioning. She was lighter than she should have been, her skin cool to the touch but not yet hypothermic. The older girl stirred as he gathered her sister, violet eyes fluttering open to stare at him with a mixture of fear and defiance. "It's okay," Marcus said softly, the universal translator in his collar converting the words into basic Vorthak. "I'm here to help." The girl's eyes widened. She tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged. Marcus couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. She was asking about her sister. "She's safe," he said, adjusting his hold on the unconscious child. "Both of you are safe now." The older girl's resistance seemed to crumble all at once. She allowed Marcus to lift her, her head falling against his shoulder with exhaustion. As they drove back toward the colony, she whispered something in her native language that the translator rendered as, "Please don't send us back." Back at the colony's medical center, Dr. Yuki Tanaka worked with quiet efficiency. The medical bay was small but well-equipped, designed to handle everything from mining accidents to exotic alien physiology. Yuki had been the colony's doctor for 8 years, and Marcus had never seen her fazed by anything. "Severe dehydration and malnutrition," she reported, running a scanner over the younger child. "But they'll live. Their physiology is remarkably resilient." She paused, glancing at Marcus. "The question is, what are 2 Vorthak children doing here? This is well outside their territory." Marcus had been wondering the same thing. The Vorthak collective maintained strict borders, and their species rarely traveled beyond their own star systems. For children to be this far from home suggested something serious had happened. The older girl Zara, she'd managed to tell them through chattering teeth, had been in and out of consciousness for the past 2 hours. Her sister, Lyra, hadn't woken up yet. Both had been cleaned up and wrapped in thermal blankets, for lines feeding them essential nutrients. Zara, Marcus said gently, pulling a chair beside her bed. Can you tell me what happened? How did you get here? The girl's violet eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that reminded him of Sarah. His wife had been a xenobiologist before the accident, fascinated by the subtle differences in how various species expressed emotion. She would have loved these children, he realized with a sharp pang. Stepmother, Zara whispered, the translator struggling with some of the words. Father died in battle. She said we were burden. Not her blood. Brought us here and left. The simple words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Abandonment was considered one of the worst crimes in most civilized systems, but, apparently, the legal bonds of step-parenthood didn't extend to protection in Vorthak society. These children had been dumped on a hostile world and left to die simply because they weren't genetically related to their guardian. When? Marcus asked. 3 days, Zara said. Maybe 4. We tried to find water, food. Found your. She gestured weakly at the walls around them, place. 4 days. 2 children alone on an alien world for 4 days. Marcus felt something crystallize in his chest, a determination he hadn't felt since Sarah's death. These children had survived through sheer will and mutual protection. They deserved better than abandonment. You're safe now, he said again, and this time he meant it as more than comfort. Over the next week, Marcus found himself spending most of his free time in the medical bay. Lyra had awakened on the 2nd day, revealing herself to be perhaps 5 years old and possessing an infectious laugh despite everything she'd been through. Zara, the older sister, remained protective and cautious, but Marcus caught glimpses of the child beneath the survival instincts, curious, intelligent, with a dry sense of humor that reminded him of his own father. Dr. Tanaka had contacted the colonial administration about the children, but bureaucracy moved slowly even in the best circumstances. The nearest Vorthak diplomatic post was 6 months away by commercial transport, and there was no guarantee they'd take responsibility for abandoned children anyway. They could spend years in the system, Yuki warned Marcus during one of their evening conversations. Foster care facilities on the outer colonies aren't, well, they're not equipped for Vorthak children. Marcus nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying. The facilities were overcrowded, underfunded, and often little better than warehouses for unwanted beings. The children would survive, but they wouldn't thrive. That night, Marcus sat in his small apartment, staring at Sarah's photo and thinking about the sound of Lyra's laugh. It was a bright sound, untainted by the trauma she'd experienced. Zara's protective instincts reminded him of himself at that age, taking care of his younger siblings when their parents worked double shifts in the earth factories. These children had already lost their father, been abandoned by their stepmother, and survived days alone on a hostile world. They'd clung to each other with the kind of fierce loyalty that couldn't be taught, only felt. They deserved more than survival. The next morning, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. I want to apply for emergency guardianship, he told Administrator Collins, the colony's bureaucratic overseer. Collins, a thin man with nervous energy and a tendency to quote regulations, nearly choked on his coffee. Marcus, you can't be serious. They're aliens. Different species, different legal systems, different everything. The paperwork alone would take how long? Marcus interrupted. Years, probably. And that's assuming the colonial administration approves it, which they won't. Cross-species adoption is almost unheard of. But, not illegal? Collins hesitated. Not explicitly illegal. But, highly irregular. There are biological considerations, cultural differences, psychological impacts. They've already been psychologically impacted, Marcus said. They were abandoned. Left to die. Right now, they need stability, not more bureaucracy. The argument continued for 2 hours, with Collins citing regulation after regulation while Marcus countered with practical concerns about the children's immediate welfare. Finally, Dr. Tanaka arrived with her own perspective. Medically speaking, she interjected, the children are thriving under Marcus's attention. Their stress markers have decreased significantly since he started visiting regularly. Lyra asks for him specifically when she has nightmares. That evening, Marcus sat with both children in the medical bay. Lyra was curled against his side, listening to a story from his tablet's database. Zara sat nearby, ostensibly focused on a puzzle game but obviously listening to every word. Marcus, Zara said suddenly, using his name for the first time. Why are you helping us? It was a fair question. Marcus had asked himself the same thing multiple times. The easy answer was that it was the right thing to do. No child should be abandoned regardless of species. But there was more to it than that. Because you remind me of someone, he said honestly. Someone who believed that families are made, not just born. Lyra looked up at him with wide violet eyes. What's a family? The question hit harder than it should have. Marcus realized that these children, despite having a father who died in battle, might never have experienced what humans considered a traditional family structure. Vorthack society was hierarchical, formal, with relationships defined by duty rather than affection. A family, Marcus said slowly, is people who take care of each other. Who protect each other. Who stay together even when things get hard. Zara's eyes met his. Like we did? In the wilderness? Exactly like that. Lyra nestled closer to his side. Are we family now? Marcus felt something break open in his chest, not the sharp pain of grief he'd carried for 3 years, but something warm and healing. If you want to be. The legal process that Administrator Collins had predicted would take years began to move with surprising speed. It turned out that emergency guardianship had different rules than formal adoption, and Marcus's status as a respected colony member carried weight with the local magistrate. More importantly, when colonial administration officials interviewed the children, both Zara and Lyra were adamant about wanting to stay with Marcus. He tells good stories, Lyra explained to the stern-faced official conducting the interview. And he makes sure we eat enough. Zara was more diplomatic but equally firm. He didn't ask for anything in return for helping us. That's unusual. The official's report noted that the children appeared healthy, well-adjusted, and showed strong attachment to their human guardian. It recommended temporary placement pending a full psychological evaluation and species compatibility assessment. 3 months after Marcus found them huddled against the sensor post, Zara and Lyra moved into his apartment. It was a small space, 2 bedrooms, a common area, and a kitchenette, but it felt larger somehow with their presence. Lyra's drawings covered the walls, colorful representations of the world around them filtered through a child's imagination. Zara had claimed a corner for her reading nook, surrounded by datapads containing everything from technical manuals to adventure stories. Marcus found himself adapting to routines he'd forgotten since Sarah's death. Breakfast became a negotiation between human coffee and Vorthack nutrition supplements. Evening became story time, with both children insisting on turns to read aloud. Night brought the occasional nightmare, but also the comfort of knowing he could help chase them away. The other colonists' reactions varied. Some, like Dr. Tanaka and mining supervisor Rodriguez, were supportive and helpful. Others whispered about the unusual arrangement, questioning everything from legal precedent to the psychological impact on the children. Marcus ignored the whispers. He'd learned years ago that people would always find reasons to disapprove of choices they wouldn't make themselves. What mattered was the gradual relaxation he saw in both children. Zara's protective hypervigilance softened into normal caution. Lyra's bright laugh became more frequent, less tinged with the desperate edge of a child who'd learned too early that joy could be taken away without warning. The colony's evening shift had just begun when Marcus received the message that would test everything they'd built together. Administrator Collins appeared at his door with a grim expression and a data tablet that seemed to weigh more than it should. "We've received a communication from the Vorthack Collective," Collins said without preamble. "They want the children back." Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his world. Behind him, he heard Zara's sharp intake of breath. Both children had been learning English along with their other studies, and they understood enough to grasp the implications. On what grounds? Marcus asked, his voice carefully controlled. Blood claim. It seems their father's brother has come forward, claiming legal custody under Vortak law. He's demanding immediate repatriation. Zara stepped forward, her young face set with determination that reminded Marcus of her first day in the medical bay. Uncle Theron, she said, the translator rendering her contempt perfectly. He never cared about us when father was alive. Why now? Collins looked uncomfortable. According to the filing, he was unaware of your father's death and your situation until recently. He claims he would have acted sooner if he'd known. That's not true, Zara said flatly. Father sent messages to all his brothers when he went to battle. Uncle Theron responded that he had no obligation to acknowledge defeat. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't about family reunion or cultural preservation. This was about something else entirely, and these children knew it. What does he want? Marcus asked. Zara and Lyra exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their shared experience and mutual understanding. Finally, Zara spoke. We're old enough now to work. Vortak children begin labor assignments at our age. Uncle Theron has mining interests. He needs workers he doesn't have to pay. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Child labor was technically legal under Vortak law, though most modern families had moved beyond such practices. Apparently, not all families had evolved quite as far. Can he do that? Marcus asked Collins. Legally? Under Vortak law, yes. Blood relatives have absolute authority over orphan children. The colonial administration can't interfere with internal Vortak family matters. But they're not on Vortak territory, Marcus pointed out. They're on a human colony, where they were placed illegally by a Vortak citizen who has since been arrested for child abandonment. The collective considers this a rescue operation. Marcus looked at the two children who had become his world. Lyra had moved to stand beside her sister, their hands linked with the automatic protectiveness he'd seen that first day. They were afraid, but they weren't hopeless. They trusted him to find a solution. For the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt truly alive. These children needed him, not just for basic care but for protection against a system that would use them as disposable labor. They'd survived abandonment, starvation, and exposure through mutual loyalty and sheer determination. Now they faced a different kind of threat, and Marcus realized he would do anything to keep them safe. How long do we have? He asked. The Vortak ship will arrive in 6 days, Collins said. They're demanding immediate transfer upon arrival. 6 days. Marcus's mind began working through possibilities, options, legal technicalities. There had to be a way. There was always a way if you were willing to think beyond conventional solutions. Collins, he said suddenly, what would happen if the children weren't here when the ship arrived? The administrator's eyes widened. Marcus, you can't be suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking a hypothetical question. Collins glanced around nervously, as if expecting colonial security to materialize from the walls. If the children couldn't be located, the Vortak delegation would file formal complaints with the colonial administration. There would be investigations, sanctions, possibly criminal charges for whoever aided in their disappearance. But the children would be safe? Marcus, this is insane. You're talking about kidnapping, I'm talking about protecting 2 children from forced labor. Marcus's voice carried an edge that made Collins step backward. Something every civilized society should consider a moral obligation. That night, after the children were asleep, Marcus sat in his small workspace and began researching everything he could find about interstellar law, colonial administration protocols, and legal precedent for cross-species custody disputes. The database searches revealed a complex web of treaties, agreements, and bureaucratic procedures, but also a few interesting loopholes. The most promising was something called sanctuary jurisdiction, a rarely used provision that allowed colonial administrators to refuse extradition in cases involving fundamental threats to sentient being welfare. It had been invoked exactly 3 times in the past 50 years, and each case had taken years to resolve through the courts. Years. Marcus could work with years. The next morning brought unexpected support from an unlikely source. Dr. Tanaka appeared at his door with coffee and a data tablet full of research. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said without preamble. "From a medical perspective." Marcus invited her in, grateful for any perspective that might help. The children were at their morning education session with the colony's learning AI, giving them time to speak freely. "I'd been reviewing Vorthack physiology and development patterns," Tanaka continued. "What these children survived, the abandonment, exposure, starvation, would have killed most adults of their species. They're alive because of remarkable genetic luck and mutual support." Okay. How does that help us? Because trauma at this developmental stage can have permanent psychological impacts. Removing them from a stable, nurturing environment and placing them in what amounts to a labor situation could cause irreversible damage. She handed him the tablet. "I've prepared a formal medical assessment recommending against repatriation on psychological grounds." Marcus scanned the document, recognizing the careful medical language that would carry weight with review boards and courts. This could actually work. It's a start. But, Marcus, you need to understand what you're risking. If this goes wrong, you could face criminal charges, deportation, even imprisonment. "These children mean a lot to you, but they mean everything to me," Marcus interrupted. "I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. For 3 years, I've been going through the motions of living. These kids, they brought me back." Tanaka studied his face for a long moment. "Sarah would be proud of you." The words hit harder than Marcus expected. Sarah had always believed in fighting for what was right, even when it was difficult or dangerous. She'd chosen xenobiology because she wanted to build bridges between species, to find common ground in the vast diversity of galactic civilization. Protecting these children felt like continuing her work in a way she never could have imagined. Over the next 4 days, Marcus built a coalition of support that surprised him with its breadth. Mining supervisor Rodriguez offered to testify about the children's positive integration into colony life. Teacher Lin provided educational assessments showing their remarkable progress in human cultural adaptation. Even some of the Zolari traders, normally neutral in human affairs, offered statements about the children's obvious attachment to their guardian. But the most powerful support came from the children themselves. When Administrator Collins interviewed them as part of his required documentation, both Zara and Lyra were articulate about their fears and desires. "Uncle Theron never protected us," Zara told the recording device. "When Father died, we sent messages asking for help. He said we were Father's responsibility, not his. Now that we're old enough to work, suddenly we're family again?" Lyra, despite her age, was equally clear. "Marcus tells us we're smart and special. Uncle Theron would tell us we're workers and tools. I know the difference." The night before the Vorthack ship was scheduled to arrive, Marcus sat with both children in their shared bedroom. They'd been unusually quiet all day, processing the reality that their safe world might end tomorrow. "Are you afraid?" Zara asked suddenly. Marcus considered lying, giving them the reassurance adults usually offered children in difficult situations. But these children had survived too much to be comforted by false promises. "Yes," he said honestly. "But I'm not giving up." "Good," Lyra said, her small hand finding his. "Because we're not giving up either." The Vorthack ship arrived at dawn, a sleek military vessel that looked out of place among the mining colony's industrial architecture. Marcus watched from his apartment window as the shuttle landed, disgorging a delegation of stern-faced Vorthack officials in formal robes. His communicator chimed with a message from Collins, they're demanding immediate transfer. "We're out of time." Marcus looked at the children, who stood ready with small packs containing their few possessions. They discussed this moment extensively, planning for multiple scenarios. Now it was time to see if human determination could triumph over alien bureaucracy. "Ready?" he asked. Zara and Lyra nodded solemnly. Together, they walked toward an uncertain future, but, they walked together, the conference room in the colony's administrative building felt smaller with 5 Vorthack officials occupying chairs designed for human proportions. Their leader, Commander Vextar, stood nearly 7 feet tall with the characteristic violet skin and rich patterns that marked his warrior caste. Beside him sat a civilian in expensive robes, Uncle Theron, Marcus realized, studying the man who wanted to claim his children. Theron was older than Marcus had expected, with the soft look of someone who'd lived comfortably while others fought wars. His eyes held a calculating intelligence that made Marcus's skin crawl. This was not a man driven by familial love. "The matter is simple," Commander Vextar announced, his words filtered through the universal translator with military precision. "These children are Vorthack citizens. They belong with their family." Marcus sat across from them with Zara and Lyra flanking his chair. Dr. Tanaka occupied the seat to his right, her medical assessments spread across the table. Administrator Collins looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the galaxy. "The matter is anything but simple," Marcus replied calmly. "These children were abandoned on our world and left to die. They've been legally placed under my guardianship through proper colonial administration procedures." Uncle Theron leaned forward, his voice carrying the smooth tone of someone accustomed to getting his way. "A temporary arrangement born of emergency circumstances. Now that proper family has been located, the children can be returned to their own people." "Their own people abandoned them," Dr. Tanaka interjected, sliding her medical tablet across the table. "These children suffered severe trauma that requires ongoing psychological support. Removing them from their stable environment could cause permanent developmental damage." Commander Vextar barely glanced at the medical data. "Human medicine cannot accurately assess Vorthack's psychological needs. We have our own medical specialists who weren't interested in these children when they were dying of exposure," Marcus pointed out. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vorthack honor culture placed great emphasis on directness, but Marcus's blunt statement crossed several lines of diplomatic courtesy. Commander Vextar's hand moved instinctively toward where his weapon would hang in a military context. "You question Vorthack honor," the commander's voice carried a dangerous edge. "I question the honor of abandoning children and only claiming them when they become useful," Marcus replied without backing down. Zara, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke. "Uncle Theron, you told Father that caring for children was weakness. You said warriors should focus on glory, not family obligations. Why have you changed your mind?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Uncle Theron's carefully composed expression flickered for just a moment, revealing something predatory beneath the civilized mask. "Children often misremember conversations," he said smoothly. "Especially during times of grief and stress. I recorded the message," Zara said simply. "Father kept all family communications in his personal files. Would you like me to play it?" Marcus felt a surge of pride in the girl's preparation and intelligence. She'd clearly been planning for this confrontation, gathering evidence and building her case with the methodical precision of someone far older than her apparent age. Uncle Theron's face darkened, but, before he could respond, Commander Vextar intervened. "Family disputes are internal matters. The children will be returned to their uncle's custody for proper evaluation and placement within Vorthack society." "No," Lyra said suddenly, her young voice carrying surprising authority. "We choose Marcus." The simple declaration seemed to surprise the Vorthack delegation. In their rigid hierarchical society, children didn't typically express preferences about adult decisions. But, Lyra continued, her words carefully chosen despite her age. "In human culture, children have rights. We learned this in our education sessions. We have the right to be safe, to be cared for, and to have our wishes considered in matters affecting our welfare. Human rights do not apply to Vorthack children," Commander Vextar stated firmly. "They do when those children are residents of a human colony under human jurisdiction," Administrator Collins said, finally, finding his voice. Marcus noticed the man's hands trembling slightly, but his words were steady. The colonial administration has sovereignty over all residents within colony boundaries, regardless of species. Temporary sovereignty, Uncle Theron corrected. Pending resolution of custody matters. Dr. Tanaka leaned forward. My medical assessment indicates that removing these children from their current placement would constitute child endangerment under colonial administration protocols. I'm formally recommending against repatriation on medical grounds. Furthermore, Marcus added, producing his own tablet, I've filed a formal petition for permanent adoption under the Interspecies Family Protection Act. Until that petition is resolved, the children remain under my legal guardianship. Commander Vextar's expression shifted from annoyance to genuine anger. The Interspecies Family Protection Act applies to voluntary arrangements between allied species. The Vortak Collective has not authorized cross-species adoption with humans. The act doesn't require species-level authorization, Marcus replied, having spent days studying the relevant legal text. It establishes individual rights that supersede species politics. The room fell silent as both sides processed the implications. Marcus had essentially declared legal war, using human law to challenge Vortak authority. It was unprecedented, potentially explosive, and completely necessary to protect the children. Uncle Theron stood slowly, his civilized mask finally slipping entirely. You think your human laws matter to us? These children are property under Vortak tradition. They will return with us, willingly or not. Property? Marcus's voice carried a deadly quiet that made several people in the room shift nervously. Did you just call them property? A translation error, Commander Vextar said quickly, recognizing dangerous territory. Children are responsibility. Family obligation. But the damage was done. Zara and Lyra had heard their uncle's true perspective, and their faces reflected the betrayal and fear Marcus had expected. Uncle Theron saw them as assets to be exploited, nothing more. I think this meeting is over, Marcus said, standing and placing protective hands on both children's shoulders. Any further communication should go through legal representatives. You cannot simply leave, Commander Vextar declared. The children come with us now. Actually, they can't, Administrator Collins said, pulling up documents on his tablet with newfound confidence. Dr. Tanaka's medical hold supersedes custody disputes. The children cannot be transported while under active medical care for trauma-related psychological conditions. Marcus almost smiled at the administrator's creative interpretation of medical protocols. It wasn't technically accurate, but it would hold up under initial legal review long enough to establish stronger protections. Uncle Theron's face flushed darker purple with rage. This is kidnapping. We will file formal complaints with the Colonial Administration, the Trade Federation, and the Interspecies Council. File away, Marcus replied calmly. The children will be here when you want to visit through proper legal channels. As they left the conference room, Marcus could hear Commander Vextar speaking rapidly into his communication device in what sounded like formal military language. The stakes were escalating rapidly, but Marcus felt oddly calm. For the first time in years, he was fighting for something that truly mattered. The apartment felt like a sanctuary when they returned, but Marcus knew the feeling wouldn't last. The Vortak delegation would be working on multiple fronts to reclaim the children, and human bureaucracy moved slowly compared to military determination. Are we in trouble? Lyra asked, curling up in her favorite chair with a drawing tablet. We're in a fight, Marcus corrected gently. But that's different from being in trouble. Sometimes fighting is the right thing to do. Zara, ever practical, was already thinking ahead. They'll try to pressure the colony administration. Uncle Theron has connections with off-world mining consortiums. He could threaten the colony's trade relationships. Marcus studied the 12-year-old who spoke like a seasoned political analyst. Vortak children were apparently raised with a sophisticated understanding of power dynamics, which explains Zara's strategic thinking about their situation. Let me worry about the politics, Marcus said. Your job is to be children and let the adults handle the complicated stuff. But we're not just children anymore, Zara pointed out. We're evidence. Our choices matter in ways they didn't before. She was right, and Marcus realized these children would never have the luxury of simple childhood innocence again. Their survival had depended on adult-level decision-making, and their freedom now required them to articulate complex emotional and psychological concepts for legal review. The next several days brought a cascade of legal filings, medical evaluations, and bureaucratic maneuvering that would have been impressive in its scope if it weren't so exhausting. Commander Vextar had established a temporary command post on the Vortak ship, treating the custody dispute as a military operation requiring systematic pressure on multiple fronts. Uncle Theron, meanwhile, had been busy making connections within the colony's business community. The Zalari traders, in particular, seemed nervous about anything that might complicate their relationships with Vortak mining interests. Several had approached Marcus with suggestions about reasonable compromise that would satisfy all parties involved. Marcus's response to these suggestions was polite but firm. The children would not be returned to someone who viewed them as property, regardless of the economic consequences. Dr. Tanaka's psychological evaluations provided crucial support for their position. Her detailed assessments documented the children's remarkable recovery from trauma under Marcus's care, contrasted with clear evidence of anxiety and fear when Uncle Theron was mentioned. The medical data painted a picture of children who had found stability and safety for the first time in their lives. But the strongest evidence came from the children themselves. When the court-appointed advocate interviewed them separately, both Zara and Lyra were articulate about their preferences and their fears. Uncle Theron sees us as workers, not people, Zara explained to the advocate, a stern woman named Martinez who specialized in interspecies legal matters. Marcus sees us as family. The difference is everything. Lyra's testimony was equally powerful despite her age. Marcus makes sure we're safe and happy. Uncle Theron only wants us back because we're old enough to work now. That's not love. The advocate's report noted the children's remarkable emotional maturity and clear understanding of their situation, as well as their obvious attachment to their current guardian and fear of return to biological family. But legal victories in the colony administration were only the beginning. The Vortak military had filed formal complaints with the Trade Federation, claiming that human colonists were interfering with internal Vortak family matters. If the Trade Federation sided with the Vortak position, they could impose economic sanctions that would devastate the mining colony. Marcus found himself caught between his determination to protect the children and his responsibility to the 43 other humans whose livelihoods depended on the colony's continued operation. It was a burden he hadn't anticipated when he first brought 2 dying children in from the wilderness. The weight of that responsibility hit him during a colony council meeting where several residents expressed concerns about the economic implications of his guardianship petition. "We understand you care about these kids," said Maria Santos, one of the long-term miners. "But, if the Trade Federation cuts our shipping contracts, we all lose everything. Maybe there's a way to work something out with their uncle. You want me to hand 2 children over to someone who intends to use them as unpaid labor?" Marcus asked quietly. "We want you to consider the bigger picture," replied Jim Morrison, the colony's lead engineer. 43 humans versus 2 alien kids. The math isn't complicated. The math is exactly what's wrong with this situation, Dr. Tanaka interjected sharply. "We don't sacrifice children to preserve economic arrangements. That's not who we are." The meeting devolved into arguing factions, with some colonists supporting Marcus's position and others pushing for compromise. Marcus listened to the debate with growing realization that he was asking his neighbors to risk their livelihoods for children they barely knew. That evening, he sat with Zara and Lyra in their small apartment, considering options he didn't want to think about. Both children had been unusually quiet since the colony meeting, and Marcus suspected they'd overheard more than he'd intended. "You're thinking about giving up," Zara said suddenly, her violet eyes fixed on his face with uncomfortable accuracy. "I'm thinking about all the people who could be hurt by our fight," Marcus replied honestly. "Including us," Lyra pointed out. "Especially you. But also the other families here who didn't choose this battle but are caught in it anyway." Zara was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful in the way that reminded Marcus she was far older than her apparent age. Finally, she spoke. Father used to say that some battles choose the warrior, not the other way around. You didn't choose to find us, but you did. You didn't choose to love us, but you do. Now you have to decide what kind of warrior you want to be. The simple wisdom in her words hit Marcus harder than any legal argument or bureaucratic pressure. These children had already survived one abandonment. They deserved to know that someone would fight for them, regardless of the cost. "What kind of warrior do you think I should be?" he asked. "The kind who doesn't abandon family," Lyra said simply. That night, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. If the colony couldn't afford to keep fighting for the children, then they would fight somewhere else. The galaxy was large, and there were places where a human with mining expertise and 2 brilliant children could make a new start. The next morning, he began quietly researching independent settlements, frontier colonies, and non-aligned worlds where colonial administration jurisdiction was limited and trade federation influence was minimal. It would mean leaving everything he'd built over 15 years, but it would also mean keeping his family together. Dr. Tanaka was the first to realize what he was planning. She found him in the colony's communication center, reviewing transport schedules and settlement opportunities in the outer systems. "You're thinking of running," she said without preamble. "I'm thinking of relocating," Marcus corrected. "To somewhere the children will be safe." "That's still running, Marcus. And it makes you a fugitive." "It makes me a father protecting his children." Tanaka pulled up a chair, her expression serious. "I understand the impulse. But running solves the immediate problem while creating dozens of new ones. You'd be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your lives. As opposed to handing them over to someone who sees them as property? As opposed to fighting this properly, through the system, and establishing precedent that protects other children in similar situations." Marcus looked up from his research, studying the woman who would become his strongest ally in the fight for the children's welfare. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we take this public. Full documentation, medical records, the children's own testimony. Make this about more than one custody dispute. Make it about fundamental rights and the responsibilities of civilized society." The idea was ambitious and dangerous. Public attention would bring scrutiny from multiple governments and organizations, but it would also make it much harder for either side to pursue extreme measures without consequences. The children would be exposed to media attention, public pressure, political manipulation, Marcus pointed out. "They're already exposed to all of that, just without the benefit of public support," Tanaka replied. "Right now, this is being fought in bureaucratic shadows where power matters more than right. In the light, their voices carry more weight." Marcus considered the proposal, weighing risks against potential benefits. The children were already showing remarkable resilience and intelligence. They'd survived abandonment, exposure, and political maneuvering with grace and determination. Maybe they were strong enough to survive public advocacy as well. That evening, he presented the option to Zara and Lyra, explaining both the potential benefits and the definite costs of taking their fight to the galactic media. "People would want to interview us?" Zara asked. "Probably. And they'd want to know details about your abandonment, your life with me, your feelings about your uncle. It wouldn't be private anymore." Lyra considered this seriously. "But if people knew what really happened, they might help?" "Some would help. Others might criticize or use your story for their own purposes. Public attention is complicated." Both children were quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. Finally, Zara spoke. "We've been fighting this privately, and we're losing. Maybe it's time to fight publicly." "I agree," Lyra added. "Uncle Farron is counting on nobody caring about us except him. If other people care, that changes everything." Marcus felt a surge of pride in their logical thinking and emotional courage. These children understood strategy in ways that would impress seasoned politicians, but they'd retained the fundamental optimism that made them believe in the possibility of justice. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once we do this, there's no going back to being a private family." "We're not a private family anymore anyway," Zara pointed out. "We're evidence in a legal case. At least this way, we get to tell our own story. The decision made, Marcus contacted the only journalist he trusted with something this important, Elena Vasquez, a veteran correspondent who specialized in interspecies relations and human rights issues. He'd met her years ago when she'd done a story on colonial mining safety, and he'd been impressed by her dedication to accuracy over sensationalism. Elena's response to his initial message was immediate and intrigued. She arrived on the colony 3 days later with a small recording crew and a reputation for stories that changed political landscapes. "This is about more than custody," she said after reviewing the documentation and interviewing all parties involved. "This is about what happens when different species' legal systems conflict over fundamental rights. The implications could reshape interspecies law." The first interview took place in the colony's common area, with both children sitting beside Marcus as Elena asked careful questions about their experiences. Zara and Lyra were nervous but articulate, their answers revealing both their traumatic past and their hopeful present. "What do you want people to understand about your situation?" Elena asked near the end of the session. Zara considered the question carefully. "That families aren't just about blood. They're about love and protection and staying together when things are hard. And that children aren't property," Lyra added with startling directness. "We're people with feelings and thoughts and the right to be safe." The story that Elena produced was powerful, balanced, and devastating in its implications. She'd interviewed Uncle Theron and Commander Vextar as well, giving them opportunity to present their perspective. Their responses, particularly Uncle Theron's repeated references to family obligations and proper utilization of young workers, painted a damning picture of their true intentions. When the story broke across galactic media networks, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Human rights organizations called for emergency intervention. Child advocacy groups from multiple species filed supporting briefs. Even some Vorthack dissidents spoke out against their own government's position. But the most powerful response came from ordinary people across the galaxy who saw two children fighting for the right to stay with the only family they'd ever truly known. Messages of support flooded the colony's communication systems. Offers of legal assistance came from prestigious law firms on multiple worlds. Most surprisingly, financial support began arriving from donors who wanted to ensure the children had resources for their fight. The Vorthack response was swift and furious. Commander Vextar accused human media of deliberate misrepresentation and inflammatory propaganda designed to interfere with sovereign Vorthack law. Uncle Theron filed defamation charges against both Elena and the colony administration. But the damage to their position was already done. Public opinion had crystallized around the children's cause, and political pressure was mounting on both governments to find a solution that protected Zara and Lyra's welfare rather than simply enforcing legal technicalities. Marcus watched the media storm unfold with mixed emotions. The children were getting the support they needed, but they were also losing the privacy and normalcy he'd tried to provide. Every day brought new interview requests, legal consultations, and political maneuvering that required their participation. "Do you regret going public?" he asked Zara one evening as they reviewed the day's media coverage. She considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "I regret that it was necessary. But I don't regret doing what we had to do to stay together. Even if it means we'll never have a quiet, private life again?" "Marcus," Lyra said, looking up from her drawing tablet, "we never had a quiet, private life before you found us either. At least now people know we exist." Her simple statement reminded Marcus of something fundamental. These children had been invisible until they were abandoned, then invisible again until he'd brought them into his life. Public attention might be overwhelming, but it was also protection. It was much harder to disappear children that the galaxy was watching. As he tucked both children into their beds that night, Marcus realized they'd already won something important, regardless of how the legal battle resolved. They'd proven that love could transcend species, that families could form across biological boundaries, and that children had voices worth hearing in decisions about their own lives. The fight was far from over, but they were no longer fighting alone. The arrival of Ambassador Kethvar changed everything. The Vorthack diplomat emerged from her personal shuttle with the measured grace of someone accustomed to diffusing interspecies crises, her formal robes marking her as high-ranking nobility rather than military command. Unlike Commander Vextar's aggressive posturing or Uncle Theron's calculating smoothness, she carried an aura of genuine authority that made everyone in the landing bay stand a little straighter. Marcus watched from the observation deck with Zara and Lyra, noting how the children's posture shifted at the sight of their species' formal diplomatic regalia. In Vortak culture, ambassadors held nearly sacred status as mediators between conflicting honor codes. Their arrival typically meant someone had decided the situation required wisdom rather than force. "She outranks everyone," Zara murmured, recognizing the significance before Marcus did. "Uncle Theron can't dismiss her opinions like he did ours." Within hours of her arrival, Ambassador Cathvar had requested private meetings with all parties involved in the custody dispute. But she began with an unexpected choice: the children themselves, interviewed without their uncle, their guardian, or any other adults present. Marcus paced the apartment while Zara and Lyra spent 2 hours in the colony's secure conference room with one of the most powerful Vortak diplomats in the galaxy. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, could be decided by how well 2 children could articulate their needs to someone whose cultural perspective viewed family obligation very differently than human emotional bonds. When the children returned, both looked thoughtful rather than frightened. Lyra immediately curled up in her favorite chair, while Zara sat at the kitchen table with the serious expression that meant she was processing complex information. "How did it go?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice casual despite the tension eating at his nerves. "She listened," Zara said simply. "Really listened. Not like Uncle Theron or Commander Vextar, who just waited for us to stop talking so they could tell us what we were supposed to want. She asked about before," Lyra added quietly. "About father, about what happened when he died, about the messages we sent asking for help." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Those messages had been desperate pleas from grieving children to extended family that had systematically ignored them. The recordings would paint Uncle Theron's current custody claim in the worst possible light. "Did she seem surprised by anything you told her?" Zara's expression grew grim. She was surprised that Uncle Theron had received our messages and chosen not to respond. In Vortak culture, ignoring a family distress call is considered deeply dishonorable. She asked very specific questions about the timing and content of those communications. The next morning brought Marcus's own interview with Ambassador Cathvar. The conference room had been rearranged with traditional Vortak seating, low cushions arranged in a circle that encouraged equal participation rather than hierarchical positioning. The ambassador sat across from him with the relaxed alertness of someone comfortable in her own authority. "Mr. Chen," she began, her English carrying only a slight accent despite the universal translator, "you have created an unusual situation. Cross-species adoption is rare enough. Cross-species adoption that challenges biological family claims is unprecedented." "I understand the legal complexities," Marcus replied carefully. "But sometimes unprecedented situations require unprecedented solutions." "Indeed. Tell me, what do you believe makes a family?" The question seemed deceptively simple, but Marcus recognized it as fundamental to the entire dispute. His answer would reveal his philosophical framework for child-rearing, family bonds, and cultural values. "Mutual care, protection, and commitment," he said after a moment's thought. "Families are built through daily choices to prioritize each other's welfare, not just shared genetics." An interesting perspective. In Vortak society, family represents duty, honor, and the continuation of bloodline legacy. Children are the next generation of warriors and leaders, shaped by ancestral wisdom and clan obligations. And where do love and individual happiness fit into that structure? Ambassador Cathvar studied him with intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than he was saying. "You ask questions that young Vortak philosophers debate in universities. The tension between individual desire and collective responsibility is not unique to human culture. But it's central to this case. Zara and Lyra have individual thoughts, fears, and preferences. They're not just vessels for clan obligations." "No," the ambassador agreed quietly. "They are not. Which brings me to a troubling discovery during my investigation of this matter." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of discovery?" Theron Vascalt has significant debts to off-world mining consortiums. His recent interest in reclaiming his brother's children corresponds precisely with his need for low-cost labor to fulfill contracted obligations. She paused, her expression hardening. In my culture, using family honor to mask economic exploitation is considered among the worst possible dishonors. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because it was surprising, but because it confirmed his worst fears about Uncle Theron's motivations. The man wasn't even pretending to care about the children's welfare, he needed workers he could legally control and abuse. What does that mean for the custody decision? It means that Theron Vascalt's claim lacks honor foundation. Without honor, family obligation becomes meaningless under traditional Vortak law. Ambassador Kethvar leaned forward slightly. However, that does not automatically resolve your situation. The children remain Vortak citizens under our jurisdiction. Marcus felt hope and frustration warring in his chest. Uncle Theron's disqualification was crucial, but it didn't necessarily mean the children could stay with him. Other relatives might come forward, or the Vortak government might insist on state custody rather than cross-species adoption. What would it take to establish legitimate guardianship under Vortak law? Marcus asked. The ambassador's slight smile suggested he was asking the right questions. Adoption requires demonstration of honor, capability, and commitment to the children's welfare. Traditionally, this involves combat trials, resource displays, and testimony from respected community members. Combat trials? Marcus's military background was limited to basic colonial defense training. I'm not a warrior. Yet you fought for these children against superior political forces, established their safety in hostile circumstances, and demonstrated willingness to sacrifice your own comfort for their welfare. Ambassador Kethvar's expression grew thoughtful. Combat takes many forms, Mr. Chen. You have already proven your warrior status through your choices. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from Marcus's financial resources to his long-term plans for the children's education and cultural development. Ambassador Kethvar asked detailed questions about Vortak customs, suggesting she was evaluating his commitment to maintaining the children's connection to their birth culture. That evening, Marcus researched everything he could find about Vortak adoption procedures, honor codes, and diplomatic protocols. The legal framework was complex, but not impossible to navigate with proper support and preparation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the children themselves. Zara had been corresponding with other young Vortak through educational networks, sharing their story and gathering perspective on their situation. What she discovered challenged everyone's assumptions about Vortak cultural uniformity. There's a growing movement among younger Vortak, she explained to Marcus and Dr. Tanaka during their evening discussion. They call themselves honor evolutionaries, people who believe traditional honor codes should adapt to include individual choice and cross-cultural relationships. How significant is this movement? Dr. Tanaka asked. Significant enough that several prominent families have publicly supported our right to choose our guardian, Zara replied. And they're putting pressure on the collective council to modernize family law. Marcus felt a spark of hope. Political movements could shift public opinion, and public opinion could influence legal decisions even in hierarchical societies like the Vortak Collective. The next development came through Elena Vasquez, the journalist who had first brought their story to galactic attention. Her follow-up investigations had uncovered a pattern of child exploitation within certain Vortak families, with Uncle Theron's debts representing just one example of adults using custody laws to acquire unpaid labor. This isn't just about your children anymore, Elena explained during a secure communication link. This is about fundamental reforms to protect vulnerable young people across multiple species. You've accidentally started a galactic child welfare movement. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He'd simply wanted to protect two children he'd grown to love, but somehow that had expanded into challenging legal systems across multiple worlds. The personal had become political in ways he'd never anticipated. Ambassador Kethvar's next announcement changed the dynamics entirely. Standing before assembled representatives from both species, she made a declaration that stunned everyone involved. After thorough investigation and consultation with collective council leadership, I am authorized to offer Mr. Marcus Chen formal adoption standing under modified Vortak family law. The children have expressed clear preference for remaining with their current guardian, their welfare under his care has been exemplary, and their biological family's honor claim has been found invalid due to exploitative motivations. Uncle Theron's face flushed dark purple with rage. This is impossible. I have blood rights that cannot be simply dismissed by diplomatic convenience. Your blood rights were forfeited when you ignored family distress calls and failed in your honor obligations, Ambassador Kethvar replied coldly. Under traditional law, abandoning children in need strips relatives of future custody claims. Commander Vextar looked equally frustrated but more controlled. What are the conditions for this unprecedented adoption arrangement? Mr. Chen must demonstrate ongoing commitment to maintaining the children's cultural training in Vortak customs, formal ceremony establishing your honor status, and ongoing obligations to support clan interests, Ambassador Kethvar explained. It is not granted lightly, but these circumstances are not ordinary. Zara and Lyra exchanged glances that seemed to carry entire conversations. Finally, Zara spoke. Marcus, this means you become our father in Vortak law, not just human law. It means we truly become family under both cultures. It also means you can't abandon us later without facing serious honor consequences, Lyra added with remarkable directness for her age. Marcus looked at the two children who had transformed his life from empty routine into daily adventure. The legal complexities were daunting, but the emotional reality was simple. He couldn't imagine life without them. I accept, he said without hesitation. Uncle Theron stormed from the room, followed by Commander Vextar issuing rapid orders into his communication device. But their protests no longer mattered. Ambassador Kethvar had provided a path forward that satisfied both legal systems while prioritizing the children's welfare. The formal adoption ceremony took place 2 weeks later, combining human legal procedures with Vortak honor traditions. Marcus found himself wearing traditional clan robes, speaking carefully rehearsed phrases in the Vortak language, and accepting responsibilities he didn't fully understand but was completely committed to fulfilling. Zara and Lyra stood beside him in their own ceremonial outfits, looking more like the young Vortak they were than the abandoned children he'd found months earlier. But their eyes held the same trust and affection he'd seen growing throughout their time together. Do you, Marcus Chen, accept the honor and burden of clan membership, swearing to protect these children as your own blood, to raise them with knowledge of their heritage, and to defend their interests above your own comfort? Ambassador Kethvar asked in both languages. I do, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was promising. Do you, Zara and Lyra Vascult, accept Marcus Chen as your chosen father, honoring? Even some of the Zalari traders, initially nervous about political complications, offered congratulations and gifts appropriate for a family celebration. Ambassador Kethvar approached Marcus during the gathering, her formal diplomatic demeanor relaxed for the first time since her arrival. You have surprised me, Mr. Chen, she said quietly. When I first reviewed this case, I expected to find a well-meaning human who had overreached his understanding of Vortak culture. Instead, I found someone who understood family bonds in ways that transcend species. I just wanted to keep them safe, Marcus replied honestly. Yes. That simple desire has created something remarkable. These children have a security now that few Vortak young people experience, absolute certainty that someone will fight for them regardless of political convenience or economic pressure. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Marcus found himself alone with his children legally, emotionally, and permanently his children now in their small apartment. The space felt different somehow, more solid, as if the legal recognition had made their family bonds more real. So what happens now? Lyra asked, curled up in her chair with a new drawing tablet received as an adoption gift. Now we figure out what normal life looks like, Marcus said, settling beside Zara on the couch. We never had normal life before, Zara pointed out. We went from survival to fighting for our right to exist as a family. What does normal actually mean? It was a fair question. Their family had been forged in crisis, tested by legal challenges, and validated through public advocacy. They'd never had the luxury of simple domestic routine that most families took for granted. Normal means making decisions about education, activities, and daily life based on what's best for you rather than what satisfies legal requirements, Marcus said thoughtfully. Normal means having the time and space to just be a family. I like the sound of normal, Lyra said sleepily. But, even as they settled into their new legal security, Marcus knew their story was far from over. The galactic attention they'd received had established precedents that would affect other cross-species families. Ambassador Kefvar had hinted at broader legal reforms being considered by multiple governments. They'd won their personal fight, but they'd also inadvertently become symbols of something larger, the possibility of building families across species lines, of choosing love over biological obligation, of fighting systems that treated children as property rather than people. As Marcus tucked both children into their beds that night, he realized their quiet mining colony would never be quite the same. They'd brought galactic attention to a place that valued anonymity, challenged legal systems that preferred simple solutions, and proven that love could create families that transcended every traditional boundary. "Dad," Zara said as he turned off her bedside light. It was the first time she'd used the word, and it hit him with unexpected emotional force. "Yes? Thank you. For choosing us. For fighting for us. For making us feel like we matter." Marcus kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of the special shampoo Dr. Tanaka had ordered for Vortak hair texture. "You matter more than you'll ever know." In the hallway outside their rooms, Marcus paused to look at the photos covering the walls, pictures of their time together, formal adoption ceremony images, and candid shots of daily life that captured the gradual transformation from traumatized refugees to confident children. Sarah's photo still held the place of honor on the kitchen table, but now it was surrounded by evidence of the family they'd built together. He thought she would approve of the controlled chaos, the interspecies complications, and the absolute certainty that love had triumphed over every obstacle in their path. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The children's education would require specialized materials to maintain their cultural connections, his clan membership would involve ongoing obligations to Vortak community, and their public profile would continue generating interview requests and speaking opportunities. But tonight, Marcus was simply a father whose children were safe, loved, and legally protected. After months of legal battles and uncertainty, it was enough to know that they'd won the right to build their future together. Whatever the future might hold. 2 years had transformed everything. Marcus hardly recognized the man he'd been before Zara and Lyra arrived, that hollow shell going through the motions of living while counting days since Sarah's death. Now he measured time differently: Lyra's first successful attempt at human cooking, Zara's debate team victories, family camping trips to explore Kepler 442b's strange geological formations. The apartment had grown too small for their expanding life. What started as temporary accommodation for refugees had become wholly inadequate for a family with hobbies, friends, school projects, and the accumulated treasures that children collected. Marcus had been saving credits for months toward a proper house with separate bedrooms, a real kitchen, and space for the girls' increasingly complex educational and creative pursuits. The transformation wasn't just domestic. The entire colony had evolved around their unusual family's presence. What began as a remote mining outpost had become something of a minor pilgrimage site for families dealing with interspecies adoption challenges. Dr. Tanaka now consulted regularly with other colonial medical facilities about cross-species family psychology. Even the Zalari traders had expanded their operations to include educational materials and cultural items for mixed families. But the most remarkable transformation was in the children themselves. Zara, now officially 14 in human developmental terms, had grown into the family's diplomatic bridge between cultures. She corresponded regularly with young Vortak studying on different worlds, maintained connections with human children through educational networks, and had become something of an expert on interspecies family law through necessity and genuine interest. Lyra, approaching 8 years old, had developed into the family's artist and social connector. Her drawings had evolved from simple childhood scribbles to sophisticated representations of life on Kepler 442b through alien eyes. More importantly, her natural empathy and infectious enthusiasm had made her the most popular child in the colony's small school, with friendships spanning multiple species. The morning Marcus received the message that would change their lives again started normally enough. Lyra was practicing her Vortak calligraphy while eating breakfast, her purple tongue sticking out in concentration as she worked on the complex character forms. Zara reviewed her presentation for the Colony Council meeting where she'd been invited to speak about youth perspectives on interspecies cooperation. "Dad," Lyra said suddenly, using the title that had become natural over the past 2 years, "why do some Vorthaks still think families have to be the same species?" Marcus looked up from his own breakfast and the mining reports he'd been reviewing. Even after formal adoption and clan membership, questions about family validity occasionally arose from various sources. Most were academic or political in nature, but some came from genuinely confused individuals trying to understand their unprecedented situation. "Because change is hard," Marcus replied carefully. "Some people find it easier to stick with old ways rather than figure out new possibilities. But we're proof that it works," Zara pointed out, not looking up from her notes. "We're happy, healthy, and successful according to every measurement anyone cares about." "We're proof that it works for us," Marcus corrected gently. "That doesn't automatically convince people it would work for others." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus's communication device chiming with an urgent message. The sender identification made him freeze. Ambassador Kethvar, who had returned to Vorthak space immediately after their adoption ceremony 2 years earlier. "Marcus," the recorded message began, "I hope this finds your family well. I am contacting you with an unusual request that may significantly impact your lives. The Vorthak Collective Council has been monitoring the success of your family arrangement as part of broader discussions about modernizing family law. Your example has become a reference point in debates about individual choice versus traditional obligation." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Political attention from the Vorthak Collective was never entirely comfortable, even when it seemed positive. "The Council has authorized a formal study of interspecies family success, and they would like your family to participate in an extended evaluation program. This would involve relocation to a Vorthak educational facility for 1 standard year, where the children could receive advanced education in their cultural heritage while researchers document family dynamics and psychological outcomes." The message continued with technical details about the research program, assurances about educational quality, and careful diplomatic language about the significant contribution to interspecies understanding their participation would represent. But Marcus heard the underlying message clearly: this was as much political pressure as academic opportunity. Zara and Lyra had stopped their morning activities to listen, their expressions growing serious as the implications became clear. "They want to study us," Lyra said when the message ended. "Like specimens," Zara added with characteristic directness. Marcus sighed, recognizing the complexity of the situation. The research program represented genuine opportunity for the children to connect with their cultural heritage in ways the remote colony couldn't provide. Vorthak educational facilities were renowned for their academic rigor and cultural immersion programs. The girls would have access to teachers, peers, and resources that could significantly enhance their development. But it also meant leaving the safety and security they'd built over 2 years, subjecting their family to intensive scrutiny by researchers and government officials, and potentially becoming political symbols rather than simply a family. "What do you think?" Marcus asked, knowing that any decision this significant had to include the children's perspectives. Zara considered the question with her usual careful analysis. "It's an opportunity to learn things we can't learn here. But it's also risky. If the research concludes that interspecies families are problematic, it could affect other families like ours. And if we say no, they might think we're hiding something or that our family doesn't work as well as we claim," Lyra pointed out with startling insight for her age. Marcus realized his children had learned to think politically through necessity, analyzing not just personal preferences but broader implications of their choices. It was a sophisticated level of decision-making that most adults never developed, but these children had been thrust into political significance before they'd finished learning basic mathematics. Over the next several days, Marcus researched everything he could find about the proposed research program. The Vorthak Institute for Social Development was a prestigious facility that combined advanced education with cutting-edge research into family dynamics and cultural adaptation. The academic opportunities were genuinely impressive, but the research component raised significant concerns about privacy and autonomy. Dr. Tanaka provided crucial perspective during their family discussion that evening. From a medical standpoint, the children are thriving beyond any reasonable expectation for trauma survivors. Their psychological development, educational progress, and social adaptation are exemplary. Research documentation of their success could provide templates for other families facing similar challenges. But research also means constant evaluation and observation, Marcus pointed out. They wouldn't be able to just be children. They haven't been able to just be children since the day they were abandoned, Zara said quietly. At least this way, their experience helps other people. The decision ultimately came from an unexpected source, a message from another family facing a custody challenge similar to their original situation. A human woman on a frontier colony had found abandoned Zalari children and was fighting for the right to keep them safe. The woman's letter was desperate, explaining that she'd been following their story and hoping for guidance about legal strategies and emotional support. "We're not the only ones," Lyra said after Marcus read the letter aloud. "There are other families like ours who need help. And other children who need protection," Zara added. If participating in this research helps establish legal precedent or provides resources for other families, maybe it's worth the personal cost. Marcus felt pride in his children's willingness to consider others' welfare alongside their own interests, but also concern about the burden such thinking placed on young people who should have the luxury of purely selfish decision-making. "Are you sure you want to take this on?" he asked. "Once we agree to participate, there's no backing out if it becomes too difficult or intrusive." Both children exchanged one of their